Professor Fábio, pode começar.
Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning. Meu nome é Fábio Waltenberg. Eu vou falar algumas palavras em inglês e depois eu volto ao português. Quem quiser me ouvir em português pode selecionar o canal desse idioma no Zoom. Já é uma forma de todos ficarem a par do funcionamento do serviço de interpretação simultânea deste evento. So, my name is Fábio Waltenberg. I am a professor of economics at the Universidade Federal Fluminense in Niterói, Brazil, and a researcher at the Center for Studies on Inequality and Development. I coordinate a local team involved in evaluating the citizens' basic income, a very innovative policy which has been implemented in the Brazilian city of Maricá. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Stynes from the Jain Family Institute, or JFI, who will share this opening session with me. The JFI has been an amazing partner in our research in Maricá. We are even launching a new project related to the sovereign fund of Niterói. You will hear a lot about our partnership today and tomorrow. We would like to welcome all of you to this workshop in which we will discuss experiments, policies, and strategies regarding this extraordinary public policy called Universal Basic Income. We will have the opportunity of hearing and interacting with remarkable scholars who have been studying, designing, or implementing basic income policies around the world. There will be 6 panels in English with simultaneous interpretation to Portuguese, and 2 panels in Spanish tomorrow afternoon without simultaneous interpretation. Now, I would like to speak some words in Portuguese. For those of you who would like to hear the English version of this talk, you are invited to switch to the English channel on Zoom. Bem, antes de falar de renda básica ou do evento em si, eu queria deixar uma breve palavra sobre a pandemia. É um momento triste e desafiador no mundo todo. A situação tem sido particularmente difícil no Brasil, onde mais de 500 mil de pessoas morreram de Covid, incluindo parentes e amigos de muitos de nós. Membros da nossa equipe de pesquisa e colegas de trabalho perderam pessoas queridas. A UF perdeu funcionários, como o querido Linus Ramos, um dos mais queridos da Universidade. Um dos niteroienses mais conhecidos do país, o ator Paulo Gustavo, também nos deixou recentemente. Apenas ontem foram registrados 115 mil novos casos, o maior desde o início da pandemia. Deixamos, então, nossos sentimentos a todos os que têm sofrido tanto com a pandemia e que as nossas reflexões de hoje e de amanhã sirvam como uma pequena contribuição para imaginarmos um mundo mais justo e harmonioso. Programas de garantia de renda têm atraído a atenção crescente de acadêmicos, de formuladores de políticas e do público em geral. A pandemia de Covid-19 acentuou o interesse pela temática, tendo em vista a súbita necessidade de assegurar o sustento de milhões de pessoas, grande parte das quais não constituíam o público-alvo típico de políticas assistenciais. Programas de transferência de renda são importantes para amenizar a pobreza, sim, mas não apenas por isso. Também fortalecem a proteção social, reduzem desigualdades, dão dignidade à vida de muitas pessoas e, talvez, sobretudo, combatem a insegurança econômica. Estudos científicos de diferentes áreas em diferentes locais, empregando as mais variadas e sofisticadas metodologias de análise, têm encontrado resultados muito animadores, mas ainda há muitas questões em aberto e uma infinidade de controvérsias e dilemas. A renda básica universal é uma política pública discutida há décadas. Segundo a definição dos belgas Philippe Van Parijs e Yannick van der Borck, trata-se de uma renda monetária regular, paga a todos, individualmente, sem nenhuma comprovação de carência de recursos, nem exigência de trabalho. Universalidade é, portanto, um dos princípios fundamentais, mas não é o único. Tão importante quanto, ou mais, é a incondicionalidade. Mas também são relevantes a individualidade, a regularidade e o pagamento em dinheiro, e não em vales, cupons ou serviços. Não há tempo para aprofundarmos agora as razões para que esses e outros autores defendam a renda básica. Direi apenas nesta fala inicial que elas envolvem valores como segurança econômica, dignidade, liberdade, autonomia, cidadania, eficiência, justiça social, entre outros. Recentemente, diversas experiências têm sido levadas a cabo ou estão em discussão ao redor do mundo. O Brasil tem sido terreno fértil para políticas e estudos sobre o tema. Vale a pena mencionar rapidamente alguns marcos das políticas dessa natureza. A Constituição de 1988 instituiu um benefício monetário não contributivo, incondicional, com status de direito, no valor de um salário mínimo, R$ 1.100, aproximadamente $200. O benefício de prestação continuada, destinado a idosos e pessoas com deficiência em condição de pobreza. Criado em 2004 e expandido substancialmente nos anos seguintes, o Bolsa Família constituiu outro marco importante, ao transferir renda não apenas a pessoas inaptas a trabalhar, como no caso do BPC, ou a famílias com crianças, como nos programas do tipo Bolsa Escola, que precederam Bolsa Família, mas de forma inédita a adultos aptos ao trabalho e, inclusive, a famílias sem crianças. Também, em 2004, o Brasil tornou-se o único país a tornar lei o direito de todos os cidadãos a uma renda básica incondicional, o que seria realizado de acordo com a disponibilidade orçamentária do governo federal, priorizando inicialmente os mais necessitados, mas visando a termo a universalidade. 17 anos mais tarde, em abril de 2021, o Supremo Tribunal Federal determinou que essa lei 10.835 de 2004, de autoria do então senador Eduardo Suplicy, seja regulamentada ainda este ano. E isso é mais uma razão para que grande atenção seja dada à temática deste workshop. Em 2020, o Congresso Nacional aprovou o auxílio emergencial, que se tornou uma experiência de redistribuição de renda em larga escala, com fortes impactos na redução da pobreza e da desigualdade. Foi também mais um passo rumo à naturalização no Brasil de alguns elementos da renda básica. Embora tenha sido uma política focalizada, foram mais de 65 milhões de beneficiários. Talvez mais de 120 milhões de pessoas foram indiretamente beneficiadas nas respectivas famílias. Pessoas que nunca sonharam em receber benefícios assistenciais os receberam pela primeira vez em 2020 no Brasil. O país também tem mostrado muita vitalidade no nível local, com programas municipais de garantia de renda, dos quais um dos maiores destaques é o de Maricá, sobre o qual falaremos em breve, e que está, inclusive, inspirando vizinhos, como Niterói, que está prestes a lançar uma ambiciosa política de transferência de renda com a moeda digital local chamada Araribóia. Várias razões explicam o dinamismo do Brasil na formulação e na implementação de políticas de garantia de renda. Não podemos deixar de registrar aqui o nome de uma pessoa particularmente importante, tendo em vista sua inabalável perseverança na luta pela renda básica no Brasil. Trata-se, é claro, do senador Eduardo Suplicy, que, coincidentemente, completou 80 anos essa semana. Sem Suplicy, não teríamos tido Bolsa Escola, nem Bolsa Família, nem auxílio emergencial, nem renda básica de cidadania em Maricá. E provavelmente não estaríamos discutindo, nesse momento, renda básica. Gostaríamos de dedicar este evento ao nosso querido Eduardo Suplicy e seus 80 anos. Algumas palavras, então, sobre o evento. A oficina sobre renda básica de cidadania, experimentos, políticas e estratégias será uma ocasião para atingir um dos objetivos imaginados quando submetemos o projeto deste evento a um edital da FAPERJ, a Fundação de Apoio à Pesquisa do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, no segundo semestre de 2019, qual seja o de disseminar resultados da pesquisa realizada em Maricá pela UF em parceria com o JFI. No entanto, em razão da pandemia, os planos mudaram. O evento presencial teve de ser feito em formato remoto. E quanto ao projeto de pesquisa de Maricá, os resultados serão bastante preliminares. Serão apresentados em 2 sessões, uma daqui a pouco, na vertente quantitativa, e outra amanhã, na vertente qualitativa. Também vamos compartilhar com vocês alguns dos desafios metodológicos impostos à pesquisa. Pela própria natureza da política de Maricá, da política de renda básica de Maricá, como a sua intenção de cobrir a totalidade dos registrados no cadastro único, não é um experimento, é uma política de fato, o que dificulta a análise. E também outro desafio são as contingências provocadas pela pandemia. Isso impactou os cronogramas, os métodos, os instrumentos de pesquisa. Aproveitamos, então, que o evento teria de ser remoto para o transformarmos, com a providencial colaboração dos nossos parceiros do JFI, em uma espécie de diálogo global acerca de iniciativas de garantia de renda. Na forma de, em primeiro lugar, experimentos de transferência de renda incondicional, de maior ou menor escala, de maior ou menor duração. Por exemplo, os casos dos Estados Unidos e da Finlândia, que serão objeto de mesas específicas hoje e amanhã. Em segundo lugar, políticas efetivamente implementadas de garantia de renda em diversos países do mundo. Em Maricá, no Brasil, é claro, mas também na província de Gyeonggi, na Coreia do Sul, ou no Quênia. E, em terceiro lugar, discussão de estratégias para aprimoramento de programas não contributivos na América Latina. Então, teremos representantes do México, do Equador, do Brasil, da Guatemala, representando toda a América Central. Esperamos que as sessões do evento possam contribuir para debates no Brasil e no mundo. Quais são os prós e contras de programas universais em relação aos focalizados? Qual é o papel das condicionalidades no combate à pobreza e à desigualdade? Quais são os custos e benefícios associados a adotar indivíduos ou famílias como unidade de concessão de transferências? Qual deve ser o valor do benefício transferido? Quais são as vantagens e os inconvenientes ligados à possibilidade de acumular a renda básica com outras fontes de renda? Quais especificidades devem ser consideradas para uma concessão de benefício através de moeda digital local, como em Maricá, no Brasil, ou em Gyeonggi, na Coreia do Sul? Qual é a percepção do público em geral sobre a legitimidade de políticas universais e incondicionais? Qual é o impacto de transferências sobre trabalho remunerado e não remunerado de homens e de mulheres? Essas e tantas outras questões serão abordadas hoje e amanhã. Antes de passar a palavra ao Michael, eu tenho alguns agradecimentos a fazer. Começo por 3 pessoas fundamentais para colocar o evento de pé: Andréa, Jéssica e Igor, da nossa equipe de pesquisa. Eles fizeram de tudo um pouco para que o evento pudesse acontecer. Muito obrigado, Andréa, Jéssica e Igor. 2 instituições forneceram os recursos financeiros: a FAPERJ, através do edital de eventos de 2019, e o programa de pós-graduação em economia, por meio de recursos PROEX-CAPES. Outras pessoas e instituições contribuíram decisivamente para tornar possível o evento. A empresa Vox Intérpretes, a pessoa da Beatriz e da Helena, que tem a difícil tarefa de, ao fazer a tradução simultânea, melhorar aquilo que nós dizemos na língua original. Agradecer também a Síntese Eventos, especialmente a Beatriz, Ana Maria, Camilo e Felipe, por cuidarem com a gentileza e a competência habituais de todas as etapas de preparação, divulgação e produção do evento. O fato de nós termos 700 inscritos no evento, em grande medida, se deve ao fantástico trabalho feito por vocês. Aos demais membros da nossa equipe do SED-UF, envolvida com a pesquisa de renda básica, também deixo os agradecimentos: Roberta, Fernando, Rodrigo. Ao Leandro Ferreira, da Rede Brasileira de Renda Básica, que é nosso brilhante consultor para relações políticas, mas não apenas para isso. E, claro, a todos os palestrantes, comentaristas e moderadores que se dispuseram a oferecer parte do seu precioso tempo para elevar a qualidade do nosso evento. De modo mais geral, nossa pesquisa em Maricá só está sendo possível em razão do apoio de uma série de pessoas e instituições que têm nos fornecido dados, informações, documentos, sorrisos, abraços. Começo pela Prefeitura de Maricá. São muitas pessoas em diversas secretarias, no Instituto Darcy Ribeiro e vários órgãos diferentes. Queríamos deixar um agradecimento especial ao Natan Mello, que tem sido o nosso interlocutor mais frequente desde a época em que estava na Secretaria de Economia Solidária e também agora no gabinete do vice-prefeito. Também aos ex-secretários de Economia Solidária, Diego Zeidan e José Carlos, que nos apoiaram a cada momento, e bem como a atual secretária de Economia Solidária, Rebeca Machado. Deixar um grande abraço e um agradecimento especial também ao pessoal do Banco Mumbuca, Joaquim, Manuela e tantos outros, sempre solícitos, sempre à nossa disposição. Um agradecimento à SAGE, órgão do Ministério da Cidadania do Governo Federal, que gentilmente nos forneceu os dados identificados do Cadastro Único, que são essenciais à nossa pesquisa. Agradecer também ao Conselho Consultivo da pesquisa, o Advisory Board, composto por 13 pesquisadores brasileiros e estrangeiros de destaque, que nos permitem melhorar a qualidade da pesquisa que nós estamos fazendo. Agradecer também à UF, a Universidade, e à FEC, a Fundação Euclides da Cunha, pelo apoio institucional e de gestão do projeto. E last but not at all least, agradecer imensamente ao JFI, que vem apoiando o nosso projeto de pesquisa há cerca de 1 ano e meio, de forma muito generosa, e, em particular, agradecer pela competência, pela seriedade, pelo companheirismo, agradecer ao Paul, a Sidhya, Ioana, Marcela, Sara, Steve, Francis e tantos outros. Como estou concluindo a minha fala agradecendo ao JFI, acho que é um bom momento para eu passar a palavra a uma pessoa-chave na viabilização dessa colaboração entre UF e JFI, que é o Michael Stynes, diretor executivo da instituição. Muito obrigado e bom evento a todos nós.
Fábio, thank you very much. I am Michael Stynes. I'm CEO of the Jain Family Institute. JFI is an applied research organization in the social sciences where we conduct research and design interventions into policy. Besides guaranteed income, we have initiatives in emissions scoring, digital ethics and governance, and higher education finance. Guaranteed income has been a focus of ours since our founding. We've advised and designed pilots around the US, including most recently in Compton, California, as well as advised governments in the Alaska Permanent Fund. Our interest in guaranteed income is comprehensive. We study disbursement structures, administration, financing, and messaging. Precisely for affording the opportunity of a comprehensive understanding of the policy, the Maricá basic income evaluation is novel and represents a substantial step forward in understanding of guaranteed income, social protection policies, and development in general. The team is studying a real policy for an entire community through an ingenious development mechanism, the local currency and the development bank. Our view of guaranteed income as a potentially transformative policy of social support and development is as a policy among other policies, that it is best implemented as an integral component of responsive and egalitarian economic action. This study and these partnerships are an opportunity to model a new vision for fully shared social investment. We are enormously grateful to our partners and to your participation in this event for this reason. This event is a watershed for our joint work, and we are honored to be speaking with such a distinguished assembly of scholars and practitioners around such an urgent issue. In fact, it was an event like this that originated JFI's work with our Brazilian partners, and this kind of gathering and discussion is critical to the formation of intelligent policy and international collaboration. Fábio mentioned this list, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Here today, we will be learning from guaranteed income researchers and officials from Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, Guatemala, Kenya, South Korea, Finland, and the US. I want to close by thanking particularly UFI, our indispensable partners in this research, Fábio Waltenberg, Roberta Costa, Fernando Freitas, and the whole team at the Center of Studies of Inequality and Development, who have been our invaluable collaborators and interlocutors. I'd like to also thank the Brazilian Basic Income Network, and especially its president, Leandro Ferreira, for his consistent insight and extraordinary political skill, and for originating this partnership in the first place at an event like this, and of course, the leadership and vision of Eduardo Suplicy. Crucial too has been the city of Maricá. We could not be more grateful to them, and the Banco Mambuca for their constant support. And lastly, of course, thank you to all the researchers across all teams on both continents, and to all the participants, you all in this conference. We want to wish everyone participating today and listening in the best of luck and comfort in weathering the pandemic. Our thoughts in New York are with you all. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Michael. Nós teremos daqui a alguns minutos a mesa de abertura, a mesa 1, a mesa em que nós começaremos a falar sobre essa fantástica experiência, essa política de Maricá. temos aí alguns minutinhos, 5 minutinhos, então eu gostaria de agradecer a todos que estiveram presentes aqui nessa primeira sessão. Vocês podem se manter aqui mesmo, no mesmo link. Caso eu esteja falando algo errado aqui, Beatriz ou Felipe, vocês me corrigem, mas vocês podem se manter por aqui. E vamos aguardar, então, 10h30. Algumas pessoas podem chegar ainda para a mesa 1, das 10h30. Então, é isso. Agradeço a todos. Muito obrigado pela presença. Já temos 130 pessoas aqui. Então, realmente, mais do que eu imaginava para a nossa mesa de abertura. Muito obrigado a todos e nos vemos em 5 minutos, então, para começar a falar de renda básica nessa primeira mesa, em Maricá, especificamente. Obrigado.
Podemos começar, professor Fábio. Todos na sala.
Okay, Steve.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Okay, well, welcome to the first panel today. This is challenges to the quantitative evaluation of the Maricá Basic Income Program. My name is Stephen Nuñez, and I am the lead researcher on guaranteed income for the Jain Family Institute, and I will be chairing this session today. I think this is a great way to start off the day because this is a very important project. For a long time, research on guaranteed income has been mainly focused on pilots, not exclusively, of course, but here we have the opportunity to actually investigate, to research a policy that's in place, that's large scale, and that provides the ability to ask and answer questions that you really can't get at in a very small, very temporary pilot. But it also creates a variety of challenges. This is not a controlled experiment. This is a policy that has gone live, and that leads to additional complications in doing that research. And on top of that, this all happened right around the same time as a major world event, that is the coronavirus pandemic, which has, of course, led to its own challenges. So today we are very lucky to have the principal investigators on this project, Sidhya Balakrishnan, who is the research director at the Jain Family Institute, and Fábio Waltenberg, a professor at UFF, to present their research plans and challenges on this project. We are also very lucky to have Ioana Marinescu, economist at the University of Pennsylvania, and an expert both on basic income more broadly and on doing exactly the sorts of investigations into policy that Maricá represent. So before we get started, I just want to give you a brief introduction to what this is going to be like, how it's going to go. We have about a 40-minute presentation by Fábio and Sidhya. After that, Professor Marinescu is going to have about 20 minutes to respond. And after that, we're going to open up the floor for a half an hour or so debate. Folks who would like to ask questions have two options. If you're able to present orally, we can unmute you and you will be able to ask your question directly on camera. There is, of course, live translation available, so you may ask your question in English or Portuguese and the translator will help. Or if you're unable to do that, you can write your question in the comments and we will, if necessary, translate it and I can read out those questions. We're keeping a document to keep track of those things. I'll also just remind everybody that this is being recorded and that after the session, the recording of the session will be available going forward on YouTube. So with that, I think I would like to turn things over to Sidhya and to Fábio to get started on their presentation. And guys, I will give you a 5-minute warning when you're approaching the end of your allotted time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'll try to share here my screen. Can you see it? Is it good? So thank you so much, Steve. You already said, I think it's in the title, but you mentioned, we'll be talking about challenges, we'll be talking about plans more than anything else. We will not have the results that we expected to have by now because of all the problems we faced. So I will share this presentation with Sidhya. I will give a kind of, context about Maricá, basic information about Maricá for many of the foreigners and the Brazilians. I guess most Brazilians don't know much about Maricá. I didn't know 2 years ago, and now I kind of know something about the city. I will also give a timeline of what happened there. We have this policy, this basic income policy today in place, but it's something that started back in 2013. So I'll tell very briefly this story. And I'll give you some details about what happened last year. It was an interesting moment in the sense of policy reaction to that calamitous situation of the pandemic. And then I'll ask Sidhya to go ahead and to talk about more specifically about our plans in terms of the research overall, but specifically about this quantitative branch or quantitative portion of our project. So just to start with a picture, so that everyone knows a little bit about Maricá. I think in the video that you were watching just before the presentation, you saw some other videos. This is the city center. So I think this gives you an idea. It's not a big city. It's in the metropolitan area of Rio de Janeiro, but it's a relatively small town for Brazilian standards. And this is the main church. This is the city center. There's a soccer pitch, a football pitch, of course. This is Brazil, right? So for you to have an idea of that. So some very basic information about the city. The population, according to the last census, which was done 11 years ago, is 127,000 inhabitants approximately. It is, it's not a big city, but it's among the 200 largest cities, municipalities in Brazil. There is an estimation of the population for last year. This is provided by the official statistics office in Brazil of 164,000. It could be the case that we have more. We had an event in the presence of the mayor recently. He was talking about 200,000. It could be the case that the city is attracting many people because of the set of policies we will talk about. In terms of human development index, it's 0.765. This is very similar to human development indices of Thailand, Mexico, and Brazil, for example, in the year of 2021. So in a sense, it is a typical city in Brazil. It's not much poorer or richer than other cities here. In terms of per capita GDP, it is very rich for us as compared to other cities here, 171,000 reais, which means, to know how much it makes in terms of dollar, you just have to divide by 5. So it's about, right, $34,000, something like that. It's a 22nd among Brazilian municipalities. So it's much richer than it is in terms of size, right? And this is because, among many reasons, because of oil revenue, which we'll talk about right now. This nice picture was taken by Molly Decter, who is around, and there are many pictures taken by her, Molly Decter, from the JFI. So oil is very important in the city. The fraction of the city budget which depends on oil, which comes from oil, oscillates between 70 and 80%. So it's absolutely relevant, absolutely decisive for sustaining all the policies they have there. Revenues come from Lula field, from the pre-salt layer, one of the most important fields active right now. It is a large municipality and it has a wide coastal strip. And this explains why the city is receiving so much money as compared to other cities in the state of Rio, for example, in the state of Espírito Santo and São Paulo. The mayor since 2017 has been Fabiano Horta. One political information which may be important is that he's the only mayor from the Workers' Party among the 92 municipalities of the state of Rio de Janeiro. He's following Washington Quaquá, who was the mayor from 2009 to 2017. It is important to mention because he was the person who led who initiated most of the policies we'll be talking about today. I have here also present the results of the election of the municipal elections, which happened in November of last year. I think it's very impressive to know that Fabiano Horta was re-elected with 88% of the vote. It's highly unusual that you have a mayor with such a large share of the votes. It could be, I think it is a sign that the set of policies that he and his team are implementing and pushing forward in the city are approved by a large fraction of the population. So this is what I said until now is this very, very broad characterization of the city. Now we'll talk about the timeline of the policies, especially basic income, but some words about others. The title here is Timeline pre-2019, because 2019 is a special year. This is when everything changed and became something, the object of our study right now, the policy in the current shape. So in 2013, this is a very important year because there was this minimum income program which was created. It was much more traditional, so there were conditionalities. It was targeted on the extremely poor. So to be eligible, people had to have a total household income of less than one minimum wage, which is something like 1,100 reais today. So it was really targeted on extremely poor individuals and families. But by then, we already had the launching of the Mumbuca Bank, this institution, this community bank, which is responsible for paying the cash transfers and other services, which we can comment on later, and the local digital currency. So it is important that it's local and digital. So it means that people can use either a traditional debit card to pay what they buy using Mumbucas, this currency. They can also use an app. Usually young people use the app and old people use the card. And it's local in the sense that people can only use them in registered businesses, but only in the city of Maricá. This was a measure which was taken in order to protect somehow this money so that it circulates in the city of Maricá. There are many people who live in Maricá and work in other cities, in big cities like Rio or Niterói or São Gonçalo, which are close to Maricá. So they wanted to protect that and to make the economy more dynamic within the city. This is a picture from the bank. So when you say a bank, you imagine a very fancy building, with many very large ones. So this is the bank. This is the small house where the bank is located. So it started back in 2013. There were some small changes. One small change in 2014. It was only the value of the benefit. It was 70 mumbucas or reais, right? 1 real means 1 mumbuca. It's the same value. It was 70 mumbucas per household. So it's really very small, right? It would be something like $14. If we take the spot exchange rate, it's $14 per household. In 2014, it was raised to 85, but this is not that important. In 2015, we had important changes. So there was the introduction of a complementary policy, which was already called basic income, although it didn't have much to do with what we understand by basic income. It was, in fact, an additional 10 mumbucas, which were paid for some recipients from specific groups. There was also an important change, which was, until the moment, until 2015, the city was counting only on a specific registration procedure, enrollment procedure using a municipal data. From 2015 onwards, they started using Cadastro Único, which is a federal administrative record. And it's also a fantastic database, which we have requested for our research, as I told you in the opening remarks. And what is interesting about that is that they were using something which is already well known. It functions well, of course, with some problems, but it's good. It's been around since 2004. It's managed by the federal government, but in a very decentralized fashion. So municipalities are responsible for feeding information into this Cadastro Único. And also another point which is very important is the fact that people appearing registered in this Cadastro Único are not only the extremely poor, as I told you in the just before it was those who have less than 1 minimum wage as a total household income. Now it's less than 3 minimum wages. So it means today 3,300 reais. So, I mean, of course, they're poor people, but not as poor as those who were in the program before. So there was a potential for expanding this for those who are not extremely poor. In 2017, there was another change in terms of value, an important change. So the values rose to 110, let's say, the minimum income part plus 20, which was this so-called basic income, to 130 mambucas. But notice that it's 130 mambucas still per household, right? So it was paid this value per household. And then comes the big change in 2019. In June, it was announced. So this new program, now it was called Renda Básica de Cidadania, Citizens' Basic Income. And then these were the characteristics. So the requirement for someone to be a beneficiary, this person had to be living in Maricá for at least 3 years, to be registered in this federal Cadastro Único. And of course, in terms of eligibility to be there and to receive now, it was to have an income, a total income of less than 3 minimum wages, right? So it was expanded, or the potential of people who could receive was expanded. Another very important change was the 130 mambucas per household now became 130 mambucas per individual. So if you imagine a family of 4, for example, the value they were receiving rose from 130 to 520. So it was a really big change. For those of you who do not live in Brazil, for you to have an idea of what it means, we could compare, for example, to the Bolsa Família, very famous conditional cash transfer, federal government conditional cash transfer, which is paying on average 190 reais per household. I made some calculations for a family of 4, for example, with 2 adults and 2 children. The value they could receive, they should receive in this Bolsa Família is 171 in total, 171. So this family receiving 171 in Bolsa Família could be receiving 520 in the Maricá program. This is a discussion we might have later on the value of the benefit, the adequate value of the benefit. And also the minimum wage, so for those who work in the formal sector in Brazil, which is less than half of the working population, but it's an important indicator, it's 1,100 reais. Okay, so for a family of 4, it's around half a minimum wage, for you to have an idea. Then in November and December, there was this big push for enrollment. This is a picture of this moment in which, you know, the mayor and officials from the city were giving the cards to the people. And after that enrollment push, the number of beneficiaries rose to this 42,500. Now, this is the number we are working with right now. This means about 1/4 of the population. You know, we're not sure about the number of people living there, but it's more or less 1/4 of the total. This means, and this is important for what Sidhya will talk about later, this means 70% of the eligible group. So this is an important information too. And this is roughly the same number of current beneficiaries. We had from informal talks with staff from the Secretariat of Solidarity Economy that they have an additional 1,000, 1,500 in the program, extremely poor people. But there was a restriction last year. It was an electoral year, and because of the laws, the electoral laws here, they could not expand the program to more people during that year, except in very extreme situations. So this number of beneficiaries were kind of freezed, and that year, so in that month, December 2019, and they remained that until now with this small change I just mentioned. Then, before I talk about last year and this year, one question which some of you might have, and many people have asked that to us, to me and to our team, but is it a basic income? So is this Renda Básica de Cidadania really a basic income? So some characteristics of a basic income. The payments are regular, so it's monthly, as you know, the wages here in Brazil, as any kind of benefit, a pension benefit, it's paid monthly. It has a uniform value. This is something that some advocates of basic income defend, right? So it's the same value for a child, for an adult, for the elder, and so on. It is unconditional. Once you receive it, there is no reason why you're going to be, taken out of the program, except, of course, if you die or if you move to another city. But there will be no checks on, for example, health or education, as we have in Bolsa Familia, for example. It's complementary to other revenues, so other benefits, social assistance, contributory, non-contributory benefits, pensions, whatever, income. So it is a kind of additional revenue with respect to others. It is paid in cash, yes. Well, I put here this tick in not in green but in orange or something like this, because it's not cash. It's in fact this specific way of paying through this digital currency. It's not real. It's mumbuca, so it's a specific. So there is a kind of restriction in terms of the freedom of those who receive. They can only spend the money in Maricá, only in registered businesses. So this is an important information too. It is individual in one sense, so it's calculated on an individual basis, but it's not necessarily paid individually. So we have, in many cases, and this is a kind of legacy from previous programs, you have, in most cases, one person in the household who has the card and who receives all the benefits in this card. So it's not completely individual, as some advocates of basic income would argue for. Well, we consider here, whether the value is adequate or not is something, ambiguous. It's not, we don't have a clear answer to that. If we take into account the Brazilian context, the fact that this is, could be, a complement to other incomes, those numbers I just showed you, the value of both the average Bolsa Familia benefits, the minimum income, we believe that this is an adequate value, right? But it's not universal. So some people, they say, well, this is not a basic income because it's not universal. We like to highlight all the other features of a basic income, and many of them are very important, if not more important than the universality. So this may be a point for debate after. I'd like to say also that this is not the only policy in place there, which is also something which makes more difficult our evaluations, right? It's not that we have one single policy, right, in a controlled form, in a pilot, and so on. No, this policy is going on. It was a decision taken by the government, and we have many other policies going on there. So I'll just mention some of them in two groups. So there is this, what we could call solidarity economy, and this is the term they use in the city, this set of policies, which involve, for example, this Mumbuca Indígena, which are additional benefits for native Brazilians. We have microcredits, loans provided by the Mumbuca Bank. We have free public transportation in the city. Those buses, these red buses, they are free. We also have now bikes, which are provided free for all those living in the city. We have a new hospital, a brand new hospital, which was inaugurated last year exactly, and it was used to fight the COVID pandemic. We have, for example, state schools, especially high schools, which were managed by the state of Rio de Janeiro, a state which is not in good shape in financial terms. So they municipalize some of those schools. So they are managed temporarily by the city, by the municipality. There is financial support for students and many others. I'm sure there are some people from Maricá watching this. They will say that I forgot many very important policies in very different areas. But this is one big set of policies. And we also have something which is important for the future. I told you some minutes ago that from 70 to 80% of the city budget comes from oil. But oil, the prices oscillate, and it's something which will end up someday. So they created this sovereign wealth fund in 2017. And this year it reached 500 million with reais, which means $100 million. It's still small for international standards, but it's important, and especially, a fund from a municipality, from a small territorial and political unit, it has some importance. And just now finishing my part here, just to mention what happened last year. So from April 2020 onwards, and it's still valid now, we believe the information we have, and next month is the last one, in which we will have this set of policies, special policies, emergency policies, as a reaction to the COVID-19 crisis. The value of the benefit was increased from 130 to 300. So if we take our typical family of four I've been mentioning here, this would mean now 1,200, which is more than one minimum wage. So it's an important value. In terms like macroeconomic terms, the monthly aggregate which is injected in the city increased from 5.5 million to 12.8 million. So this might explain something that happened in the city. I will show you in a moment. But there were other policies. This PAT, this was something aimed at informal workers and micro entrepreneurs. The value of the benefit was much higher. It was one minimum wage, and it benefited more than 20,000 people. It was really a large-scale program too. And there were others, like this one for small businesses. This was a kind of job support program. And moreover, at the same time, we have to say that there was this federal emergency benefit, which was provided by the government, by the federal government, of an important value, 600 per person, up to 2 in each household, and benefited, as I told you in the opening remarks, today 65 million people, including many people in Maricá. This was only paid during 3 months. There was then, for some specific groups, there were other installments, but this was the main part of the program. And in terms of how many businesses accept payments with Mumbuka, the information, every time we present these, we have a larger number, but the less information we have, the most recent one is that we have more than 10,000 businesses. This means small shops like this one I'm showing in the picture here, but also vendors in the streets, informal, formal workers, supermarkets, everything. So more than 10,000, which is a lot in the city. I'm not claiming with this that, everything they did in the city was fantastic. I'm not claiming that, the emergency benefits last year were responsible for that. But we made a very simple exercise here with the help of João Paulo Lima, who is a master's student at UFRJ, a partner university. It's going to be published in a book in French in Canada very soon. What we tried to do here, we had a monthly data in terms of formal employment. Formal employment, it doesn't represent 20% of the total employment in Maricá. So it's something very, very restricted to a certain group. But what we did here, we used this synthetic control methodology, which Ioana knows much more than us, right? We know your famous paper on Alaska. And what we did here, if you look at this, I think it's a yellow line here. This is Maricá. This is the evolution in terms of total jobs from December 18 until March 2020, right? And this white line here is the synthetic control. So it's a set of municipalities with similar in some respects with specific weights. And they had this evolution, which was very similar. The path before the pandemic was similar, right? They were paired, in fact, because of that. And after that, we don't know what happened in these other municipalities. But when we compare it to Maricá, there was an increase. Amazingly, during the pandemic last year, there was an increase in the number of formal jobs, and there was a decrease in the other municipalities. We had some placebo tests and so on. I don't want to emphasize very much this. It was done, in a couple of weeks, very rapidly, but it could be, and we cannot say that it's only because of the RBC. It could be because of all these policies I just mentioned, and also policies, coming from other spheres of government, like the federal government. But just to let this idea here, this is something we'd like to deepen a little bit more. So with this very broad picture of Maricá and the policies, I would now ask Sidhya to go on. Sidhya, if you want, I can pass the slides here so we don't have to change who's sharing the presentation.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks, Fábio. Hello, everyone. I'm Sidhya. As Steve introduced the project and our teams, we've actually started working on this evaluation in June 2019, which was the exact time when the expansion was announced. And that's when we visited Brazil and met the mayor and got a very, very positive indication that they want to have an evaluation of the program. At the same time, the city has big ambitions. They also want to scale it up to the entire city in the next few years. So that was the context with which we started with this evaluation. The research teams we are a very big, happy research team. Of course, Fábio and I and Ioana Horshofer, I think he's here. And of course, all our researchers at UFI and JFI, who Fábio mentioned, Roberta, Fernando, Marcela, and Sarah. So we are looking at a fairly comprehensive evaluation in the sense that it has a lot of components, both quantitative and qualitative, as well as administrative data that we are hoping to utilize moving forward. I'll speak about that in a moment. And we have a lot of support from the advisory board, the government of Maricá, as we mentioned. Fabiano Horta has been extremely positive about the evaluation. And we have the support from the Cadastro Único, which is governed by the Federal Ministry of Citizenship. We have data from the Mumbuca Bank, and we also have, of course, the Brazilian Basic Income Network, led by Leandro, who actually was the one who introduced us to this evaluation. So as Fábio mentioned, we are walking into a policy. It's not a trial. It's not a natural experiment, although we tried to make something work, but it did not. And we are looking at something that started in 2013, expanded in 2019, and looking to evaluate it. So our research design has actually gone through an iterative process since 2019. So initially, the government of Maricá announced retroactively in November that only people who have updated their Cadastro Único, the federal register that Fábio mentioned, by September 30th, or are up to date, sorry, by September 30th, would be eligible to participate in the program. So up to date means that they should have updated their register within 2 years. So that was our original idea, that we would use that date, the cutoff, for a regression discontinuity design. However, because of the way, because the city really needed to make disbursements and the fact that they really wanted to expand the program before the election year, we saw that the rollout was not very clean in terms of the cutoff. So that meant that people who were even not up to date by September 30th or updated their register after were enrolled in that big enrollment push that Fábio mentioned. So that put us in, that had some implications for our research design, and we had to see what we could do. Additionally to that, as Fábio mentioned, 2020 election year, you're not allowed to expand any program, but we did see a few extremely poor residents also being enrolled in 2020. So that was 2019 for us, and we basically started thinking about what other ways we could evaluate the program. And what we are doing currently is a single, we are doing a pre-post covariate matching, which means that because we have rich administrative data, we can do matching before we go on the field with a survey, and then we would match again after we have a self-reported survey data. So yes, so that's where we are. We were originally going to be on the field last year, but given the pandemic, we are delayed, and it's very unfortunate that the situation in Brazil is quite terrible, and we are hoping to be on the field in September. So our sample is 5,500 households, split evenly between beneficiaries of the RBC program and non-beneficiaries. All of them are from this unified register, the Cadastro Único. That's our primary basis for identifying residents in Maricá. We do not have a census for the city, so that's the only register that we have. So I should note that being in the register is a criteria to be in the RBC program. So essentially what we're doing here is selecting people who were not enrolled in the 2019 push and the few people in 2020 as non-beneficiaries, and the others are RBC recipients, and that data we get from the city. So but the sample is pulled from, as Fábio mentioned, 70% of the eligible population is already enrolled. So we are selecting our 2750 50-50 split from 42,500 beneficiaries of the program and 17,000 approximately who are not enrolled. And the reason for not enrollment is unclear. It could be that they did not update their register. It could be that they lived too far away and did not hear about the RBC program. So we don't have information as to why they were not able to enroll in that push. So currently what we're doing is we're doing matching from the Cadastro Único, a large comprehensive federal register, which Fábio mentioned, and we're doing 1:1 nearest neighbor matching at the moment. This is based on a few covariates. We are limited in terms of how many variables we have, which are accurate and clean in the Cadastro Único. So we have about 5 variables or so, not too much, on which we're doing pre-matching. And we're also doing reserve samples because, as Fábio mentioned, in 2020, there was an expansion and we still do not have a very definite answer on the number of beneficiaries. So we want to make sure that if we are reaching out to a non-beneficiary during our survey, and it turns out that they did enroll based on data that we don't have yet, we will replace that with a control. The reason we did 1:1 nearest neighbor matching at the moment is because currently we are not looking at estimating the ATE or the ATT. We are essentially trying to find the most similar people in both samples, the treatment and comparison group. And then once we have the survey data is when we will have richer, cleaner data to match between the groups. So we've been talking, including with Ioana, about different techniques that we can use. So matching is kind of outdated at the moment, or it seems in academia, but what we're trying to do is thinking of creative ways, including propensity scores, as well as generalized random forests, which we will learn once we have the data and can evaluate it. And then in terms of timeline, we are hoping to be on the field in July, which is in 2 weeks. And the survey will be administered in September, hopefully. And the survey is going to be around 60 minutes. It includes a range of questions. I'll get into it in a minute, and will be in person given the city and its context. So our primary outcomes are a wide range of typically measured outcomes for an evaluation like this, since cash affects different aspects of well-being. So we have a battery of modules, including consumption, which includes food security, durable expenditure, and so on. We have a fairly large module on asset holdings and credit, work and labor market participation. This is a critical one because one of the city's motivations of launching this program is to create work within the city, which is also one of the motivations for the local currency. So they want to, so typically, or what we know of Maricá is that people travel to Rio City to work, and the city of Maricá wants to boost their economy. So work and labor market participation is crucial because they hope that paying out this cash and in Mumbuka would increase business revenue, as well as people trying to stay in the city to work. Of course, income, physical and psychological well-being. We have a range of questions on depression as well as physical health in general, both in terms of doctor visits as well as their own perception of their health. We have child well-being, understanding how the children are doing in school and their health as well. And then we also have fairly, now I think it's quite short, a module on intimate partner violence.
5 minutes, Sid.
Thanks. Okay, so I will keep this short because we have a session on this. So as I mentioned, we are doing a bunch of things in Maricá. So we also have a qualitative study as a part of this evaluation, which is you can split it into 2. One is with leaders, including politicians and policymakers, to understand their perception of how this program was introduced, launched, and its motivations. And then within our sample of from the quantitative survey, we will have 40 beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries also doing a semi-structured interview, which would be looking at their experience with the RBC program and well-being in general for the non-beneficiaries as well. This is currently under review. And as I mentioned, the city hopes to expand the program to the entire city. Their hope is to start thinking about it by the end of this year. So what we hope is that we could think of ways in which we can refine our evaluation strategy based on the city's aspirations to expand the program. This could mean many things. It could mean a phased rollout based on location. It could be based on a single location, randomized. We do not know yet. The city does not, is currently hoping, well, is currently surviving the pandemic, but hoping to understand how to roll it out. They also do not have accurate information currently on what the timeline is, or I shouldn't say accurate. They are hoping to launch it by the end of the year, but we do not have a definite timeline on when the expansion would happen. But the hope is that we can, in some way, have a more rigorous evaluation technique here, and that's going to be the next step in this project. So right now, in the next few months, we'll have our first survey, and then once the expansion happens, we will think of a new evaluation strategy. I don't have too much time. As I mentioned, there are additional things happening in Maricá as it's a local currency. So we also have data, not only on spending by people who are getting the currency, as well as from businesses, and how, whether they're keeping it in Mambuka or converting it into reais. We should have some results on that soon. We also have monitoring of the coverage of RBC, which is essentially the Mambuka data from the Mambuka Bank, and we are looking at how how it's expanded throughout the city. We're also looking at media monitoring. We are also looking at labor market outcomes in collaboration with labor economists at UFRJ. And then in general, this is looking at a research ecosystem, if you would want to call it. We're looking at ethnographic fieldwork. We're looking at inflationary records. So it's basically a very wide, comprehensive team and teams who are interested in Maricá and this particular policy. And we hope to continue working on this for a long time. And as we mentioned, we have an academic advisory board. It's led by Aldaiza Sposati and Eduardo Suplicy, who Fábio mentioned in the introductory remarks. And we have an esteemed board of members, including local Brazilian universities, qualitative, quantitative researchers, as well as from across the world. And that's it. And Ioana, whatever you want to say or thoughts, you know a lot about the program already.
Thanks. Great. Yep, we're going to have Ioana Marinescu speak now. And as Fábio alluded to, she is, in fact, an expert on the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, which has some parallels to the Maricá program. So, of course, her insights on how to effectively research this sort of policy are much needed and appreciated. So we'll turn it over to Ioana now.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was, of course, very interesting. And as Sidhya mentioned, we've had some discussions along the way, and I've always been interested in learning about this. So just for our audience here, I just want to point out some of the features that make this Maricá policy unique and interesting in the realm of basic income research. So there are three key features in my view, and I'm here partly also to give perspective to this that make this unique, which is that it's a developing country, it's in local currency, and it's a real policy on a fairly large scale that is currently in the field rather than an experiment or a pilot like we've seen many in the realm of basic income. And now I want to talk briefly about each of these three features and how meaningful they are, and some of the other literature that has been speaking to each of those points. So, the first point is that it's a developing country. I think that's quite important because in terms of certainly absolute needs, that's where we find a lot of people living in poverty, and the idea of having a basic income is particularly important for those contexts. So, there's been other research that takes place in developing countries. For example, in Kenya, they have a very nice randomized controlled trial, and one of the aspects that is quite fascinating to see there is, and I'll get back to this later, the macro effects, meaning that the effects are not only on the participants themselves, but there are broader effects on the local economy so that even non-participants end up benefiting. Secondly, it's a local currency in Maricá, and that's quite important for two reasons. First, it to some extent solves the affordability problem because it's difficult for policymakers. It can be difficult to find the cash to finance something like that. And so by using this local currency, it just makes it much more feasible to implement something like that, especially at the local level where you don't necessarily have the tax base and the tax power that a federal government might have. Even for the federal government, it's challenging, but this is quite an interesting way of going about it. And in fact, this is fairly rare. And one other context where it's been done is in a developed country, which is in South Korea. They have, in the past couple of years, also had a program of local currency, and that's been disbursed to people and has been greatly expanded during the COVID-19 pandemic. And they have shown that this program has stimulated consumption during the pandemic. And there, the local currency can only be spent at local small businesses. And so that speaks to the second advantage of potentially the local currency as far as policy feasibility, which is that it's not only helping people, but it's also helping local businesses. And that can make it more feasible from a politics and policy perspective. And third, as I mentioned, this unique feature of this policy is that it is in fact a policy. And as we've seen, a large share of the Maricá population is already receiving this and is planned to expand even more. So the scale is very important here to realize, because most of the basic income things you hear about are pilots, experiments with a few thousand people that are not designed to be a real policy over the long run. So we don't have a lot of, there are some other examples, and I'll talk briefly about my research on Alaska in a moment for comparison, but most cases of studies of basic income are using these more limited experiments, which has the advantage, as has been mentioned, Fábio said that it's easier to evaluate oftentimes because it's been designed for evaluation. But on the other hand, we are missing the real world relevance that a real policy like the one in Maricá has. So now let me briefly discuss my research on Alaska and how it relates to this study. So in the case of Alaska in the US, Alaska has, just like Maricá actually, oil and mineral revenues. And a long time ago in the 1970s, they decided to create a sovereign wealth fund in order to avoid the government using up all the revenues from the oil and put instead some of the money to the side so that future generations can also benefit potentially once the oil revenue has gone. So that was the whole idea. Then you've heard that Maricá is doing the same thing since 2017. So then in Alaska, they have this fund, and every year, the dividend from this fund, which is invested in a diversified portfolio of financial instruments, comes back to Alaskans. And this is for every Alaskan, no matter the age. Every Alaskan is entitled to the yearly dividend from the fund, and it's around $1,000 to $2,000 every year. It fluctuates from year to year depending on the performance of the fund. So it can add up to a pretty large sum for larger families, since again it's per individual. So what happens then is that we've looked at the impact of this on employment in Alaska overall. And one thing you might worry about with a basic income like this is that it could discourage work, since people get more income, and so they are not necessarily as pressed to look for a job. What we find, in fact, is that Alaska's employment was exactly the same as in the control states, which here we use synthetic controls, as Fábio mentioned. So these are the states that prior to this policy were most similar to Alaska. And we see that once the dividend was introduced, in every year, essentially, the employment in Alaska is exactly the same as in these other synthetic states. And so then we asked, well, why not? Why wasn't there a decrease in employment? And the reason that we come up with is that there's a difference between individual incentives, which could lead potentially to some decrease in employment, and what happens on a bigger scale. Because remember, in Alaska, everybody is getting this. So that creates a stimulus for the local economy. And we show that, in fact, employment increased in local businesses like restaurants, retails, and so on, with potentially some employment decline in businesses that export outside of Alaska. And so that these two effects essentially cancel each other out, so that there was no effect on overall employment. And so in this case of the macro effect, in the case of Kenya, which is different case, developing country, but there they found a net positive employment effect. And in fact, in some of our specifications for Alaska, we also find some indication that the employment effect on net might have been positive. But again, our key result is there, it didn't matter. But clearly in some cases, like in Kenya, it can in fact increase aggregate employment. And that's important because you couldn't get this result unless you use the policy at scale. So if you're doing a small pilot of a few hundred people, even a few thousand people, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not really going to stimulate the local economy. And that's why a place like Maricá is so important to help us understand what happens when a large chunk of the population is getting a basic income. So I think that's why I'm really interested in the results of this study. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of my questions and suggestions about some of the details of the study here and what happened in Maricá. So one question I had is, what happens when the income of somebody increases above free minimum wages? Are they going to get cut off from the program? So that was one. The second was in terms of business eligibility for using the Mumbukas. So you said like they have to be registered, but then you also mentioned informal businesses. So it wasn't completely clear to me if this was literally for every business that operates in Maricá, no matter the size, no matter the formal or informal status, or what's needed to register. Because as I said, for example, in South Korea, where they have local currency, it's only for small businesses. So I'm curious to learn more about the eligibility on the business side. And third, I had some comments about the upcoming survey and the idea of matching. Of course, it's something that is quite useful given the limitations of the current situation. And I was wondering if, so here to learn about the effects of the policy, we're going to compare people who are in the Cadastro Único and therefore in principle eligible, but not everybody got the policy. So we're going to compare those who didn't get the policy to those who did get the policy and match them so that they're similar, right? And then we're going to compare the outcomes. But as Sidhya said, who knows why people didn't enroll? So certainly that makes the interpretation potentially, more difficult. And so I was wondering if there was any way to also compare to similar people, but in another city who anyway didn't get the opportunity to enroll. And, that could add some additional perspective by, again, comparing people in a similar city who are the same kind of income, etc. situation, and how did their outcomes as far as, let's say, employment, because I'm doing a lot of work on employment, how did that compare? So yeah, overall, I think this is a fascinating study. It's like one of the few at scale, especially as far as local policy that have been implemented anywhere in the world. And so, I really look forward to learning more about the Maricá case. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So we are going to start the audience questions very shortly, but since Ioana had some questions for directly to the authors, I thought maybe I'd give them just a few minutes to respond to those. I think I'd also just like to add in just a couple clarifications. So certainly one that Ioana asked about was, what happens when somebody goes over 3 times the minimum wage and essentially they leave the cadastro único? Are they suddenly cut off, or is there a grace period or some kind of more gradual phase out? Certainly, you would worry about the sort of an incentive structure at the very top there. If you go $1 over, you suddenly lose a whole lot of benefits. You don't want marginal tax rates to be greater than 100%. The second question, and this is just a clarification that I saw people asking for in the chat, which is when you say per capita, this is in fact per capita meaning all children as well, not just adults. And if somebody has a baby, for example, what do they have to do to get a benefit for that baby? What is the process for that? So I think just as you respond, those 2 clarifications would also be helpful. And then after that, we're going to go to audience questions.
Okay, so maybe I can start, Sidhya.
Yep.
Ioana, thank you so much, for highlighting everything we have, the potential qualities of what we're doing. And of course, I think we were very transparent about the challenges we know we have. And, we all know about that, the problem of the unobservables, the problem of, how different are these two, our control treatment groups, and we are not able to know whether they are really similar in important respects. What we can do is the matching. So, but for the clarification questions, the first one, I think that someone in the chat was asking, and Andrea or someone from our team was already answering that in the chat. This is good also for a way of answering the clarification questions. It's per capita, it's for everyone. So at some point they had this idea, which was, I think it was not a very good idea, to say that only children from 3 years old were eligible to receive, because, they would be living for 3 years in the city. But that doesn't make sense, because, right, if the family is living there, they should be eligible to the benefit. So they dropped that, and now it's for everyone. What they have to do is to go to this Secretariat of Solidarity Economy and to inform that they have a baby, and they will include these, and their payment will be increased by 130. So this is the information we have regarding that. And then, so it's the same value for everyone, including the babies and everyone else. This is a very good question on what happens if the income goes beyond the 3 minimum wages. The problem didn't happen for the moment, or, the solution or the decision never happened, because they decided not to drop anyone from the program last year and this year, because we're in the middle of the pandemic. We know that people are dying, people are, they are ill and so on. They told us also that even people who died, now the family are still receiving the amount that was due to this person, because they don't want to do something cruel in this moment, right? And it's not in the spirit of what they think. This from our talks, maybe tomorrow in this session on the qualitative research, the interviews with the leadership, we can have more information on that. But the spirit of what they have, I think they have incorporated this idea of Eduardo Suplicy and the basic income, that you don't want to take the benefit out of the people, not for an economic reason, which is, I think, what you were alluding to, Steve, when you said, well, we have this 100% or more marginal tax rate, which makes no sense. So they don't want to do that. But I guess that after the end of the pandemic and the next year, maybe they will have to make a decision on that, whether they will keep regardless of, so once you receive it, once you have been in Cadastro Único and in the program, you have it forever. It could be the case. We're not sure. When we asked that question, they said, well, it's not in the spirit of what we're doing. We want something which is unconditional. People must have their economic security. So in terms of what they say, this is it. But we have to check what happens. And moreover, if they are kind of constrained by the budget in the next few years for different reasons, how they will react to such a situation. And answering your other direct question, clarification question, Ioana, on the business eligibility, right? So it's different from the policy in South Korea. So there was not this preoccupation, this concern they had there. I know that in South Korea, we'll have more information later in the session. I think it's tonight, right? I think it's tonight. Oh yeah, it's tonight, the last one tonight. So there they had this concern. They wanted to develop not the economy as a whole, but one particular part of the supply side, let's say, the small businesses, right? But in the case of Maricá, the situation is different. There are no like these big chains of supermarkets or stores or something like that. Like 1 month ago, people from Maricá were very happy because they were, opening the first shopping mall in the city. So it's a city composed of small businesses, with maybe one exception, but essentially this is that. So small businesses. So there's no difference. It's for everyone. Anyone can be registered and receive the money, right? And in terms of formal and informal, they made, I think it's a very important decision too, to enroll formal businesses and informal businesses. In fact, anyone, I mean, we monitor some Facebook groups of people who receive the Mumbukas, and they are, it's a kind of, they're exchanging everything. They have a very, very small, well, I make a cake and I sell it, or, clothes which are made at home. So it's really this very informal economy is also part of this Mumbuka, let's say this economy of Mumbuka includes formal and informal businesses.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. I'll be curious to see how this all works out.
Yeah, and just one additional, I think it's maybe a side issue, but just something which we remarked. There was this part of our work which is done now by Andrea and Roberta with data from the Mumbuka Bank. They realized that there are some businesses which are not active, right? They received Mumbukas 1 month and not anymore. So it could be the case that it's a very small informal business which is not operating all the time. It could also be, for example, people who come to the city for some specific event, they register for this event, like small markets, food markets and so on, and then they leave. Because we also realize that some of the registry numbers are not from Maricá, they are from other cities, and that could explain people who are there for a certain period of time. Well, I think this is for this clarification questions. Maybe Sidhya, you can talk about our main problem, the control and treatment groups, and this idea of comparing to another city, which at some point we also discussed in that meeting with the World Bank. They also asked us about this possibility too. Maybe you can talk about it.
Yeah, so the answer to your question, Ioana, is yes, there is a possibility that we could do a synthetic control, but with caveats. So the Cadastro Único, which is the big federal register, is for the entire country. And we've been lucky enough to get more than 100 cities data from the Cadastro Único. So we do have that. And there is a potential way in which we could do a matched synthetic control. But the main constraint is that the data in the Cadastro Único has there are a few constraints. One, people self-report that data specifically to enroll in benefits. So we do know they underreport quite a bit. And second is it's a wide federal register. And we've noticed over the last 2.5 years or so of exploring the data that it's very, very noisy. We have errors, we have omissions, even though it's a very expansive data set. It includes all like household quality, income, assets, disability. It has and all kinds of demographics, but it is a little noisy. So that is our constraint in terms of using admin data for synthetic control. We did explore initially an option of maybe doing a survey in a very similar city to try to see if we could do that, but that we couldn't for multiple reasons. One, there are politics involved in Brazil where the PT, as Fábio mentioned, Fabiano Horta, the mayor of Maricá, is only 90, is that right, Fábio?
Yeah, 1 in 92 municipalities, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So that created a problem. Second is Maricá is unique in the way that it's the largest benefactor of the oil revenue. So we needed to make sure that we can find a city which has a similar economy. So that was the second constraint. And the third was, of course, budget. We didn't have budget to do a survey in a similar city. So those are our constraints. We will explore the option of using the Cadastro Único if we can find a way to either get back to the federal government and see if we can get more accurate data or find a way to use that for a synthetic design.
Okay, so we have a few questions in the chat, but I want to offer the audience the opportunity to actually ask their questions directly to the panel. So if you have a question and you would like to speak it on camera, please just let us know in the comments and we will unmute you. We'll give you about 30 seconds to ask the question, just given the time limits. So just let folks know and we will we'll do it. But while we're waiting, because it does look like there's a few additional questions. Here's a question I think that's near and dear to my heart also. Someone asked about the macroeconomic aspects of the program. So during the year of the expansion and afterwards, Fábio and Sidhya, have you noted anything about the movement in the prices of goods in the city due to this injection of new currency into the economy? Do we have any data on that or any plans to investigate that?
Sidhya, I think this is a personal question from Steve, right? Because it's a professional and personal question. So we were trying to set up a way of collecting prices. We're still talking to the Instituto Darcy Ribeiro. I did not plan that question yet. So this institution, this research institute from the city of Maricá, we're trying to put up this project which would mean to follow the prices in the city of Maricá and in another 5 municipalities around, similar somehow to Maricá. So we wanted to do that. It's not easy. There are some budget and also some political questions involved. We try to do. There's something Sidhya alluded to, which is that there's a kind of competition between cities. So we have to be very careful about what to say, whether there's something which is working very well in a certain municipality. It could be understood as, well, this is not good in the other one. So we have to be careful about that. So we wanted to do this in a more rigorous way. I said it was kind of a personal question because with Steve, we discussed the possibility of trying to do some collection of prices, a retrospective collection of prices from the internet or from, price lists from some entrepreneurs, from some supermarkets and so on. We still were not able to do it. We have anecdotal evidence, really anecdotal evidence from people in the city saying two things. One is that in the beginning of the month, in the first days of the month, they see some increase in the prices. They perceive that. And this is the moment where the benefits are being paid. So people complain about that. And other people complain about a rising specific prices of specific goods, like meat, for example. So this, or chicken, things which usually an extremely poor family would not consume or would have difficulties consuming. We have a problem of hunger right now in Brazil and so on. And so this, the benefit could mean the difference between not eating some of these products and eating other ones. So there could be an effect, an inflationary effect. For the moment, we are not able to say that this exists or not. We'll try, to have this project possibly with Steve in order to check that in a more rigorous way. From other research, from research we have read about in Brazil, for example, with Bolsa Família, this has not been one particular difficulty. This is not one of the problems people are talking about very often, but it's true that the value of the benefit is different. So it could happen together with this, for example, this good macroeconomic effect, this, this boosting jobs, informal jobs and so on, maybe also informal jobs, we could have as a side effect some inflation. But I mean, yeah, this is it. We cannot answer the question right now.
I just wanted to briefly note on this point that we have some preliminary results for Alaska showing not much increase in inflation. So, and as you mentioned, prior research also in developing countries for cash benefits didn't find much evidence of a price increase. The only exception was in very remote villages, which makes a lot of sense because it's hard to bring product to market in a very remote place, and this doesn't seem to be the case at all of Maricá. So it's probably not a major concern, but as you said, also the amounts are high, so definitely something that would be good to learn more about.
Yeah, there's one additional concern in Maricá, which is what follows. The city is divided in 4 districts, and they are quite far away one from each other. So the people who live in some of these districts, they refer to the city center as Maricá. I'm going to Maricá. In fact, they are in Maricá, they are in the municipality, but they're going to the city center. So it could be the case that we also have different effects in these parts of the city. In the center, for example, we have a very dense network of businesses. We have competition there. The supply might adapt very fast. But, in these remote districts, we could have something like that, much more money and one store or something like that. So this is something to take into account in this specific setting in Maricá too.
So there's another question here, which I'm also very interested in because of some work that I'm doing right now. So one question is there any plan to look at, or is there already any data on what effect this might be having on education within the city? So certainly guaranteed income, when people, proponents of guaranteed income speak about it, they say, and this money can be used for investment in human capital, investment in skills, investment in training and education. But Sidhya and I are actually working with the economist Claudia Sam on a paper about macroeconomic modeling of guaranteed income. And there's one particular model we see where there's this sort of interesting feedback loop that occurs where, because of the basic income, there's actually less incentive to get education if the program is permanent rather than temporary. And then as a result, at least in this model, people invest less in higher education. Again, because the differential between what you get from, being educated or not, is reduced. And this problem gets worse if you are going to fund the basic income via, for example, progressive income taxes, because the people who are, very well educated are the ones who are going to bear more of the cost. So I think it's a really interesting sort of question, like what this would actually do to investments, in the traditional sense in terms of saving and investment, but also in terms of, human investment and capital. And I'm wondering, what you know about that education in the city, and whether you have any plans to look at it specifically.
Yeah, so I'll say some words, Sidhya, then if you want, just, yeah. And so one thing, we were interested in education broadly, right? So we had many questions on education, right, Sidhya? And we had to change all of them because we were asking things which made no sense anymore because of the pandemic. So things like, are the kids going to school? None of them are going to school. They're possibly returning right now in a hybrid basis, some going one day and not the other, and so on. We were asking about homework, about activities, and so on. So we will have a module involving questions on education, but a very small one, at least now. I mean, if we keep on studying this in the future, we could get to something more detailed. We do have secondary data from education. We have, Brazil produces a lot of information on education, so we can follow the path, for example, in terms of whether kids are dropping from school or not, whether they are obtaining good grades in these test scores and so on. This is something we can do regardless of, of our own research there. So we can follow things like that and indirectly, infer from, what's happening there, and if possibly the quality of education and so on. What they are doing there in the city directly is to invest in education in many ways. So they are reforming schools. So they're investing in the infrastructure of schools. This is a problem in Brazil. We still have many schools which lack the essential infrastructure. They are, as I said before, taking some high school schools which are usually managed at a state level. So basic education is managed by municipal level. But the state governments are managing high schools, and they are in bad shape in Rio. And so they are doing that. They are municipalizing. So it means that for a certain number of years, they have a contract with the state and they manage the school, they put money and so on. So this is something they are doing also. We know about other programs, like they are paying a small scholarship for those who are in higher education. So, for example, they also pay for transportation. There are some higher education courses in Maricá from one private university, this Universidade, but it's very limited. And we have UFI, which is not far, like we have some 50 kilometers, but there are some people from Maricá, including the vice mayor, for example, who is one of our students there. And what the city is doing is providing buses and some support for those who are studying elsewhere. So they are doing some investments. Regarding your question, Steve, if we refer to models and so on, I would say two things. One is that maybe the value here, although it's a good value, it's huge for Brazilian standards if you compare to other cash transfer programs. It's not enough for someone to have a comfortable life and not to aim at having a higher wage and so on. So I would not think that this is a huge problem here. And another point which is important in developing countries usually, and Brazil is not different from that, the returns to higher education are very high. So the difference, okay, there is some change. In fact, if you have high school as compared to not having it, but if you have some level of higher education, if you complete higher education, then your wage is going to be, your income is going to be much higher. So I think the incentives are still set here. Maybe in the long run, they could disappear. So I guess this is what I would have to say right now, so that we have time for other questions too.
I have, there are two questions, different topics, but they're both related to the Mambuca and the way that the money is actually dispersed. So the first, someone asked, they said that in British newspapers, there's some report that in Maricá, local businesses are not particularly interested in joining the local currency, not joining the Mambuca, because of difficulty in converting back into the national currency. It takes a lot of time. So the question there is, has this in fact been a problem? And is this information correct? And if so, what is being done to help streamline the process of conversion? The second, again, gets down to this a bit, which is, this is, as you said, a basic income, but it's also one that is paid out to the head of household, right? So the benefit goes up according to the number of individuals in the household, but essentially one person gets the card. I think there's some concern about how that interacts with women's place in the household and women's empowerment. Are they the ones receiving the money? Is a spouse receiving the money? And does that lead to any tensions within the household over control of the resources? So again, because of the way that this is being distributed, there may be some sort of spillover effects. So I guess those are two questions I'd love you guys to respond to.
Yeah, so I can start. I'll say something on the two, but on the second, Sidhya, for sure, you can also comment and talk about our module on relationship dynamics, right? The famous, one of the famous ones in our survey. So about the business, we haven't heard about difficulties for those who are already registered to to obtain the money. It's very easy to convert in 48 hours, if I remember correctly. They have the money converted from Mombucas to reais. It's very simple. So it's converted from their account in the Mombuca bank to their account in regular, ordinary commercial banks. So I think it's very easy. There was some resistance in the beginning. Of course, I think people were afraid. They didn't know very well how it was, and it was coming from the city government. They could be afraid of not being paid, or what is that? So there was some reaction, in the beginning. But at some point, there was some tipping point. I don't know exactly when. Last year was very important, but even before that, we know that it was growing fast. It was kind of inevitable to accept that. If you are a supermarket and all the other supermarkets accept and you don't, you have a problem, and you're foregoing some opportunity. One additional information on that. So Andrea and Roberta are working with the Mombuca Bank. And what they noticed, this is something soon that we will have something published on that too in English so that everyone can read. They noticed that many businesses, they don't convert all the Mombucas they receive into real. They convert part of it, of course, but they also use it to buy from other businesses. So there is a kind of secondary round of circulation of that currency. They are investigating this a little bit more, but this is interesting because there is, at least in a let's say in a first or second round, there is the circulation within the city, which is exactly what they wanted. So we haven't heard, but I mean, we are really interested in hearing about that. If there are problems, we're really eager to hear about that. We are now doing, well, I don't want to say much about the qualitative interviews and so on, but we're trying to do some interviews also with people from the opposition in the city. It's small, but it exists. The 88% who voted for Horta, but 12% didn't vote. So there are some politicians who are in the position to understand this kind of things. What are the critiques they make to this system of payments? And about, so many women receive, this is, so in the Bolsa Familia program, there was at some point a decision that priority would be given to women with different arguments, some kind of saying, well, women, they know, a very traditional view, they know what to do with the money, they will spend it better than the man, things like that. There was also some arguments in terms of providing some bargaining power, some economic power within households. It's not clear whether the small amount of money paid by Bolsa Familia were sufficient to that. And Brazil is a very, very traditionalist society, very machist and so on. So we are afraid of problems like, if the woman is receiving the money, it could be the case that the husband feels like, this is an offense to him, he's used to control all the money and so on. We're not sure about that. And this is a point which was raised also by Roldan Muradian, who is in our advisory board, this question about who holds the card, who is responsible for that, and we are asking things like that: who has the card, what kind of payment you're making with that, and so on. And there's also this part of which Sidhya might comment on, this module on what we call relationship dynamics.
Yep. One quick thing to add before I go into the module is that the way the RBC is set up is that if you're at the Cadastro Único, you can go and register your household. So you do not need to be the head of household, if I understand this correctly. If you're in the Cadastro Único, you can say my household is here. You don't need to be the head of household and register. The other interesting thing is that you can have more than one card in a household if they decide to do it. So if the person getting the first card says, no, I want a separate card for my child or my husband, they're allowed to do that. We haven't seen that trend based on our data, but there is an option to do so. And as Fábio mentioned, we do think it's an important question to look at agency and any dynamics within the household and outside the household in terms of who gets the cash. So we have an extensive module on psychological well-being as well as intimate partner violence. And we ask specifically who's getting the money and was it I don't remember if we cut it, but we did have a version where we ask who's getting the money on the RBC card and whether they have multiple cards and why they decided to do, why they decided to have either one person or multiple people getting the money.
So we're running out of time, but I guess I have a sort of a synthesis of some questions that I'm seeing that I guess goes to both Ioana's work in Alaska and also your work in Maricá. So one is, are you seeing or are you planning to investigate change in occupation as a result of receiving the basic income? So at the individual level, and then at the city level, shifts, I guess, in industry. And then I guess to sort of tie that into Ioana's work, she mentioned a bit that perhaps there is growth in sort of local service, industry employment as a result of sort of the stimulated demand as a result of having this cash, the Alaska Permanent Fund coming out. At the same time that there's a decrease in sort of export oriented sort of businesses. This is also very interesting because one of the things that people sort of who are very anti-Alaska Permanent Fund dividend commonly say is all this money is just going to go to, Hawaiian vacations and it's going to leave the country. But it sounds like, in fact, that there's actually, at least for goods and services that stay right within Alaska, there's actually a sort of a stimulative effect. So I guess I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts on, I guess, attempts to capture business level and individual personal level employment shifts. And then just more broadly, like what kinds of things, we might expect to see in Maricá and Alaska as a result of these sorts of benefits, and what that might do to, I guess, the structure of the economy going forward with whatever implications you want to muse about.
So, our results, as you said, would suggest, but I want to say that these are suggesting results that there is some movement in employment towards the non-tradable sector, meaning things that are produced and consumed locally versus the tradable sector. But on the other hand, I also have to say that if you look at, for example, research on lottery winners in Sweden, where there's a lot more data, because with Alaska, basically there's some data limitation. It's difficult to follow specific people and where they've been going in terms of occupation and industry. In Sweden, they have, as many of you might know, incredibly good data from administrative data. And they're looking at lottery winners, more or less, the typical pattern was people staying in their same job and taking more vacation, and not a lot of change in the types of jobs that people were doing. But then, of course, this is Sweden, and the situation could be quite different in Maricá.
Yeah, so let's say some more in terms of change in occupation. This is something we will try to investigate. Of course, we will have just one round now in September, so we only know what's going on right now with the people who, what kind of work they're doing. So if we do other rounds in the future, or the waves of the survey, we could see some evolution at the individual level. What happens to these families? We don't have a lot of information on employment at the municipal level in Brazil. So we have, the data I showed in that graph is from just formal jobs, which is a minority of the jobs in Maricá. We will have more information with the census, which is supposed to happen next year. It should have been done last year, but it's planned to 2022. So we'll know more about what is going on, what kind of sectors they're working on, and so on. But one important information too is that the city is a very important employer there because of all the infrastructure jobs they're doing and so on. To what extent is this a productive sector? We know that most of the city, most of the people are working in small commerce, in small businesses. There is no manufacturing activity in Maricá, and the city officials, they are aware of that. I mean, it could be the case that only the policies and only they could be subsidizing very unproductive activities. They know about that. They are aware of this problem. So what they're trying to do is to attract firms to Maricá. They're trying to set a kind of technological network there. Since it's a city with many resources, and the state of Rio and many municipalities in Rio have problems, they have some power to attract some activity there. So they have these development agencies, and they have some offices in the government which are worried about that kind of things. But for the moment, it's only speculative, Steve. I think we cannot. And just before I pass the word to Sidhya, just to say that people from our team, they said that there are many questions in the chat. We're not able to cope with all that, but you can always write to us later. We can discuss, and we can arrange other talks on specific issues too. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up now, actually, unless you have like something very quick to say, Sidhya.
Yeah, I'll just add that we are also in conversation with an organization which is doing a census of businesses. So they're collecting information about the businesses, their sector, as well as the number of employees. So that would inform us on city level employment.
Great. With that, we're out of time, so I have to end the session. I want to say a huge thank you to Sidhya, to Fábio, and to Ioana for just a really interesting discussion. I also just really want to thank the audience for coming and bringing an enormous number of really interesting questions, both to lead the conversation here and also in the Zoom chat. There's just a really vibrant conversation going on there. I'm just happy to see this just an impressive array of questions and information flying back and forth. So with that, we're going to end this session. Remember, there are a lot of excellent sessions coming up throughout the day and tomorrow. And again, just another reminder that this has been recorded, and you are going to be able to go back and listen to it on YouTube going forward. So thank you very much. And I hope you guys will stay with us to continue the conversation on other really interesting research and topics throughout the next couple of days.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.